Hello, welcome back again to Playmakers Alley. Today we're going to look to talk about the basic offensive formations. So what we're going to touch on throughout this episode is, first and foremost, the positions on offense. Then we'll talk about some of the basic ways in which you can call an offensive formation. Then give you an example of a few examples of basic formations. And then finally, just touch upon personnel. And this is just going to be like an intro into offensive formations because it can be a quite in-depth subject. So first and foremost, I am aware over the videos I've sent out so far, we haven't actually spoken about the number of people that's on the field, what the offensive positions are, what the defensive positions are. We're going to change that up today. On offense, we'll start with the foundations. You essentially have 11 people that are on offense, 5 of which are known as O-linemen, and they are the foundations of a team. Without O-line, like, you just will not do anything offensively with the ball. Then you have 5 skill players, which are a mix of wide receivers and running backs, or running back and wide receiver, or no running back. But they're a mix of running backs and wide receivers, 5 of them. And then finally, you have the QB, the person who gets often a lot of the glory, a lot of the fame, is well known pretty much everywhere, and they're the ones that touch the ball every play. Them and one of the O-linemen touch the ball every play, and they throw the ball and hand the ball off to the running back. So, as I highlighted, 11 players on offense, starting from the foundations, which are your offensive linemen. At the offensive line position, you have 5 players, what is known as 2 tackles, 2 guards, and a center. And it's essentially mirrored. So half the line are a tackle, and then tackles is the outer person on the line. Then you'll have a guard. Then you'll have a center, and it's just repeat on the other side. Now they normally are they're around where the ball is placed, with the center being directly over the ball, and normally they're split anywhere between 1.5 yards and 3 yards apart. But it's down to the offensive scheme you're in, and their job is normally to create lanes for the running back if the running back's getting handed the ball, or to create a pocket, what is known as a pocket, so an area, normally a U shape around the QB, so that they have time to survey the field and throw the ball if they're throwing the ball. Then you have the QB, who stands normally anywhere between directly under the center to 5 yards back away from the center, and the ball is snapped by the center to him. Then the next position you'll have, in fact, let me group these sets of positions. The other 5 players, known as your skill players, being a mix of your wide receivers and running backs. It's normally, as long as you have 5, you can have any makeup of wide receivers and running backs. Whether that be 3 running backs, 2 receivers, 4 running backs, 1 receiver, 5 running backs, although you wouldn't do that. No receivers, 5 receivers and no running backs. You can have any sort of makeup of them. Normally, as a bare minimum, you normally have 1 running back on the field. So 1 would be a running back, and then you would have 4 receivers placed out wide. In terms of your receivers, working off the assumption that we have 4 out, there are a variety of ways in which you can name your receivers, but what you will always have is you will have 2 wide receivers, so 2 who are closest to the sideline, or their job is to be close to the sideline. Normally in standard convention, but once again, it's scheme and formation specific, and what your team wants to do. You will have 1 wide receiver who's on the line, known as the X receiver, and then on the opposite side, you'll have a wide receiver who's off the line, known as the Z receiver. This is just standard lettering convention for those receivers. Defensively, we wouldn't care what they're called. We would just probably label them as X's, and maybe as a number if they're a key receiver. But offensively, you have the X and the Z receiver. Then in from the Z receiver, you'd have someone on the line who would be a slot, normally marked as the Y, or if they're on the line and attached right next to the offensive line, which you described as a tight end. And on the other side, you'll have another receiver who's a slot as well onto the other side. And generally, they can be labeled a variety of letters. They're normally given a letter denomination, but I've seen it labeled as J, seen it labeled as K. The running back's just normally the running back, or it might be the H if you want to refer to them as a halfback. And although this is standard, once again, whatever offensive scheme that you're playing in, or what your playbook is stating, they might have a different name and terminology, and it's not wrong. It's just different. And as long as it makes sense as to how you can call your formations, that's fine. This is just generally the standard. So you have the X on the line. You have an X wide out that's on the line. On the opposite side, you have a Z wide out that's off the line. Then you'll have a slot in from the Z wide out who's on the line, normally known as the Y, or as a tight end if they're attached right next to the offensive line. Then the other side, you have another slot. For the sake of argument, we'll just refer to them as K. And because we have one running back, we have the RB in the backfield, possibly labeled as H. And the reason that you have the X receiver on the line and the Z receiver off the line and then a slot on the line, in American football, you have to have 7 players on the line. 5 of them will be your O-line every single play, and then the other 2 will be your receivers. Now, in this standard formation I've shown you, I've explained, we have the X on the line and we have the Z off the line, but you could have both wide receivers on the line, both slots off. You just must have 7 on the line, and therefore by maths you have to have 4 off the line, or 4 within the backfield as they would term it. So that's the offensive positions. You have 5 O-linemen known as tackle, guard, center, guard, tackle. You have the QB. Normally you would have a running back. Then you would have 4 wide receivers that would be labeled by some lettering convention. If you're looking at it defensively, you wouldn't care about the letters. You'd probably just label them as X's or numbers, depending on what you want to do against them. And then those are the positions. Now, because the QB position is so well known and it's a position that's known by everyone, one of the things I want to explain with the QB position, but I want to explain it for all other positions in this basic video, is that the QB is normally one of 3 positions before the snap behind the center. If they're directly right underneath the center's arse or right behind them, that's known as under center or UC. If they're about 3 yards behind them, that's known as pistol. If they're rather than being on center, they're 3 yards behind them, that's known as pistol. And then if they're about 5 yards behind them, that's known as shotgun. Often, most commonly referred to as gun. It's just short to gun. So you have 3 positions of the QB, either under center, pistol, or gun. And you have some positions of the running back, but we can get into that into another episode when we get into more details about offensive formation. But I just want to explain that because QBs are a well-known position, and you'll often see them when you're watching, either when you're playing games in the brick ball or you're watching games elsewhere where they might be at a variety of positions, and that's what they are. Now, in terms of basic formations, what I want to preface this with is that with basic formations, you can within your playbook, you can have a variety of terminology as to what you may call it, and as long as your playbook has a defined terminology of this is what we call this look, this is what we call this formation, or this is how we determine how we call this formation, then follow that. Don't think that what I state here is the only way to describe it, because American football is about making sure that everyone's on the same page. So if your coach has defined a set of terminology or a way of describing something, and everyone on the team understands that, then that's fine to utilize and move forward. But some of the basic formations which we will touch upon, we have doubles. So doubles is known as it was the formation I was describing in my initial example, where you have 2 wide receivers either side of the offensive line. They can be spread differently, but you have 2 wide receivers either side of the offensive line. You then have the QB in the backfield, and you have a running back in the backfield. That is known as doubles. Next for basic, and that's one of the basic formations. You'll see that regularly within the brick ball scene. You'll see that regularly when you watch American football anywhere. Doubles. It's a pretty staple formation. And then another staple formation you'll have is trips. Trips like doubles. So doubles is 2 either side. Trips, as the name would suggest, is 3 receivers to one side, one receiver to the other side, and once again you have a running back in the backfield as a standard. Then the next formation, another basic formation that you would have, would be empty. Empty, called empty because essentially you have an empty backfield. You only have the QB in the backfield. You have 3 receivers to one side, 2 receivers to the other as a standard. Although it could be 4 and 1, That's also another version of empty, but the normal empty is 3 receivers to one side, 2 to the other, 2 to the other side. Then another formation that we have, just as a basic, was what I know as, and what a lot of people know as duo. So duo is like doubles in the sense that you have 2 receivers either side. Just by the fact that it's duo, that's essentially telling you is that one of the slot receivers, rather than being off the line, or not rather than being off the line, rather than being away from the offensive line, they are attached to the end of the offensive line, and they're also on the line. They're also on the line. It's not even generally, they are on the line. So duo, and that position is known as a tight end. So when someone's attached to the line and on the line, but isn't an offensive lineman, that's a tight end. So duo is doubles, just with a tight end. Then you have the only other formation that I want to just briefly touch on here. It would be what is referred to as king and queen. So king is a formation where you have 2 running backs in the backfield, one running back known as a running back or the halfback. Normally the QB would be in a pistol position, the running back would be about 2-3 yards behind them, and then offset to the right of the QB, right or the left of the QB, whilst in the pistol position, you have another running back labeled as the fullback. And in king, that fullback will be to the side of the 2 receivers. So because it's king, we have two running backs in the back within the backfield. We know we have a QB. We know we have 5 O-linemen that we must have. So that leaves us with 8. That leaves only with 3 receivers left. As a standard, you would have two receivers to one side and 1 receiver to the other side. If our fullback is to the 2 receiver side, we would refer to it as king. If the fullback is away from the 2 receiver side, we would refer to it as queen. Now, in those basic formations I've touched on, I know in the previous video I highlighted about run and pass heavy formations, generally, as well as spread. So doubles, trips, empty, they're often referred to as spread because the receivers are spread out, they're in space, you're trying to create spacing to get the ball to your players in open space, and then for them to do what they do and get a lot of yardage, hopefully score a lot of points. And those formations, by the nature of them being spread, can be more pass heavy, but also they also give you a good ability to run. If you've got a good O-line and you match up pretty well, then you can run, and they can be relatively balanced. Trips, although it can be balanced, it's generally used as a pass formation because you have 3 people to one side. Generally you're overloading one side, so the defense has to do something to accommodate that. But doubles can be balanced. King or queen, they are run looks, and as I highlighted previously, they're run looks because they've just got a heavy backfield. You can create blocking lanes relatively quickly and try and basically run the ball down the defense's throat. And as I highlighted in the previous episode, although you have run heavy formations and pass heavy formations, that doesn't mean you can't do the opposite. It's just what it's geared more efficiently towards doing. So that's doubles, trips, empty, king, queen. And then duo is also seen as generally a run formation. Once again, just because it's a run formation doesn't mean you can't pass out of it. And often people will pass out of it, but it's known as a run formation due to the fact that you have a tight end who's meant to be like a hybrid O-line receiver. So they're an extra blocker. So if they're an extra blocker, you can create more lanes, be more physical, and run the ball down the throat. And now what I've realized is that when I was talking about the basic positions, I spoke about wide receivers and running backs, and I spoke about the O-line, but I didn't explain tight ends and fullbacks, but I've given you those in some of the basic formations. So let me just briefly touch on that. Tight ends are essentially what the position is a hybrid between an O-lineman and a wide receiver. They're meant to be a jack of all trades, ideally best of both worlds. In reality, in most often cases, master of none. So they're not as good blockers as the O-line, and they're not as good receivers as the receivers, but they're good enough that they force defenses to have to be able to account for them in both the run and in the pass. Especially if they're a true tight end and talented. A true tight end has to be able to block and be relatively good at blocking, and also to a degree they have to be able to pass. And generally, if they can't do both to a relative high proficiency, the preference is that they're better blockers than they are pass catchers. That would be the preference. And the reason that tight ends are often quite heavily sought after, even within the Brit ball scene, is because they will often stress out the defense. Defenses often have body types that are generally geared towards either defending the run or covering the pass in what they're doing. So if you have someone that's able to effectively do both, it puts a strain on the body types you'll generally have on the defense. Fullback, and the tight end is classified generally as a receiver position. So it's part of the receiver group set. It's its own little subset, but it's part of the receiver group set. Then your fullbacks are part of the running back group set, and they will generally be a running back, so they can run the ball. But normally, what their body type is that they're there to, although they can run the ball, they're there to be the physical person that's looking to go downhill and block for your key halfback or your main running back. So generally, they won't get the ball handed to them often. They'll be asked to do a lot of blocking, a lot of heavy work from distance, looking to create lanes for the running back. And it's just to try and be more physical within the box, and once again stress out the defense. Because if you have an extra person in the backfield, apart from the running back that has the ball, you need an extra body type to either deal with that, or you're essentially asking a body type that doesn't normally deal with the box to have to come in and manage a fullback player. But those have been what the offensive formations are. Some basic formations. And then let me also add to the fact that with these basic formations, I've just given you the basic formation and naming convention so that you can have an understanding of them. In reality, with all these formations can be defined by their receiver set as well as their backfield. So when I say receiver set, so if you have what your receivers look like, so in our initial example of doubles, we have two either side, doubles. If we have running back in the backfield, or our QB, if our QB is 5 yards, we could call it doubles gun. Depending on where the running back's positioned, we would have another tag for where the running back's positioned, but we call doubles gun. If the running back was in pistol, doubles pistol. Running back was under center, doubles under center. Now, if you're coming up against a team that just constantly shows only one way, you still probably just refer to it as doubles. But every formation can be referred to by its receiver set and how they look, as well as its backfield. And then you have some names where by omission you just don't call it because normally it's either standard or obvious. For example, empty. Empty, most of the time, generally empty is thrown with a QB in gun. So it can be called empty gun, but it will just be called empty. In the same way with king and queen, you could call king twins left, king, but there is no need to do that because king tells you that you have a fullback to a certain side, to the same side as the twins. So there's no point in calling it by its full name. The final thing I want to touch upon on this video, just around the basics, are personnel. So personnel is defined by two numbers. The first number tells you the number of running backs you have in the field. The second number tells you the number of tight end bodies that you have in the field, or tight end types. And so people who are attached to the offensive line, normally on the line, but they can also be off the line, because of the fact that you have to have only 7 on the line. So if you have more people attached to the offensive line, then those who are right next to the tight end would be off the line. And the personnel number, so the first number tells you the number of running backs. The second number tells you the number of tight ends. And that can be used to define a formation or the actual body type. Generally, it'll be used to define the formation you're seeing. So when I say that, for example, if we were in duo, that would be, we have one running back in the backfield, we have one tight end. So that would be 11 personnel. One running back, one tight end. Now, if they were to run duo with a clear non-tight end body type, or they just had a wide receiver that's coming to play the tight end, it could be utilized to call, they're running duo out of 10 personnel. Now, I wouldn't advise that. That's not what I would do. But if that's within your scheme, that's how it's been defined, that is a way that you could utilize and do that. But normally it's just used to define what the formation is. So for example, duo has a tight end. Doesn't matter what body type is playing that, we would refer to that as 11 personnel. We would refer to king and queen as 20 personnel. You have 2 running backs, the running back and the fullback. You have no tight end, so therefore you have 20 personnel. So that was a brief introduction into offensive formation basics. We can go through a lot of different formations. Within your playbook, generally your coaches will define how they call out offensive formation. We'll give you a list of examples of offensive formation or what the process is to understand what offensive formation is, particularly on offense, because that's how you line up. And it'll be the same on defense, because we need to know what we're going up against, or what we call what we're going up against, to know how we correctly line up. So I hope you learned a little bit today about what offensive formations are, some of the basics, some basic offensive formations, and when you're out there in the Britball scene, you now have a little bit of an appreciation, or if you're checking out the odd game or two, you know what's going on those basic formations. And I'll catch you later on the next episode of Playmakers Alley.